The case begins with a grim discovery. In late 1998, human remains were uncovered in a secluded area, later identified through forensic analysis as belonging to Melissa Wolfbarger. This finding immediately set in motion the state's narrative, portraying a crime of severe violence. The recovered remains confirmed Melissa's death, yet they offered few answers about the circumstances surrounding it. No definitive cause of death could be determined. Investigators were unable to locate a murder weapon, and forensic examination revealed only post-mortem marks on the bones. These details raised immediate questions about the state's version of events, creating a gap between the discovery and the explanation of her demise. Prosecutors relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, including testimonies from family members and acquaintances, to construct a narrative of responsibility and intent. The defense countered this approach, emphasizing that the absence of direct evidence created significant uncertainty. Defense attorneys argued that jurors should not be asked to imagine the missing pieces, but rather require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The state presented timelines and behavioral inferences to support their theory, yet the lack of physical evidence weakened the clarity of their case. Melissa's disappearance had been unresolved for months prior, and the discovery of her remains became both a starting point for investigation and a source of new questions. This section establishes the foundational tension in the case. While the recovery of Melissa's remains confirmed her death, the precise details of how, when, and why she died remained obscured. The mystery surrounding her final moments set the stage for a complex legal battle and the search for accountability. Central to Melissa Wolfbarger's tragic story is the violent history of her own family. Her father, Carl Patton, had committed a string of murders during the late 1970s, though these crimes remained unproven for decades. It was not until 2003, 4 years after Melissa's disappearance, that Carl fully confessed to killing 5 people, including close friends and family members. His motives varied widely, ranging from acts of revenge to contract killings for monetary gain, and, in some cases, silencing individuals who knew too much. On at least one occasion, Carl staged a crime scene to disguise a shooting as a car accident on train tracks. Melissa's mother, Norma Patton, was actively involved in this pattern of violence, admitting her role in at least 2 murders. She participated in cleaning up blood, bleaching floors, wrapping bodies, and assisting in disposal, earning a reputation for complicity in brutal acts. These killings, later referred to as the Flint River Murders, link the Patton family name to a legacy of extreme violence and systematic cover-ups. Norma avoided prison by receiving immunity in exchange for her testimony against Carl, highlighting the complex interplay of culpability and legal strategy in the case. During trial, the defense emphasized the family's violent history, suggesting that these patterns could not be ignored when considering the circumstances of Melissa's disappearance. Furthermore, evidence demonstrated that Carl and Norma were intimately familiar with the same geographic area where Melissa's remains were eventually discovered. This detail reinforced the possibility that the family's knowledge of the environment and experience with concealment could play a role in the investigation. The dark legacy of Carl and Norma Patton created an atmosphere of suspicion, complicating the prosecution's narrative while providing context for the defense's argument that the family's history of brutality and deception must be weighed in understanding Melissa's fate. Melissa Wolfbarger's early years were marked by significant hardship and abuse. Evidence presented in court showed that her mother, Norma Patton, subjected Melissa to prolonged periods of confinement and neglect. Between the ages of 7 and 12, Melissa was reportedly locked in her room daily, limiting her interaction with the outside world and creating a sense of isolation. The family home itself was described as unhygienic and foul, leaving Melissa with a lingering odor in her clothes and hair. This neglect made her a target for bullying at school, further compounding the emotional trauma she endured. Testimony from a neighbor and childhood friend corroborated these accounts, describing the severity and frequency of the abuse Melissa faced. One particularly disturbing incident involved Melissa's sister, Tina, who secretly gave birth in the family home. Tina attempted to dispose of the infant's body in a clothes hamper, a shocking act that forced 13-year-old Melissa to confront the situation. She discovered the infant's corpse and immediately reported it to authorities, initiating police involvement. This event highlighted both the chaotic and dangerous environment in which Melissa was raised and her early exposure to traumatic experiences. Following these incidents, Melissa began running away from home frequently, seeking refuge from her abusive environment. These repeated departures underscored her desperation to escape the household's pervasive dysfunction and violence. The abuse, neglect, and exposure to criminal behavior in her formative years profoundly influenced her adolescent development. These experiences shaped her understanding of personal safety, trust, and independence, factors that played a significant role in her subsequent decisions. Ultimately, the trauma Melissa endured as a child provides critical context for her later life choices, including her repeated attempts to escape her home, her interactions with others, and the circumstances that eventually led her to meet Christopher, the man she would marry. Melissa Wolfbarger first met Christopher after repeatedly running away from her abusive household. Introduced through a mutual friend, their connection developed quickly, and by the age of 17, they had rushed into marriage. Their early life together was marked by both intense intimacy and rapid responsibility. Soon after their wedding, Melissa gave birth to 2 children in quick succession: Chrissy in August 1995, followed by Joey less than a year later. Despite the excitement of starting a family, challenges emerged early in their marriage. In 1996, while pregnant with her second child, Melissa requested that Christopher's mother, Kathy Wolfbarger, temporarily care for the children. This arrangement ultimately became permanent, formalized in 1998 when Melissa legally relinquished her parental rights. She cited her desire to prevent her own parents, whom she described as bad people, from gaining influence over her children. This decision contrasted sharply with later family claims that Melissa would never abandon her children, a point that became central during the trial. Melissa's relationship with Christopher was increasingly strained. In July 1998, she filed charges against him, but dropped them shortly afterward, illustrating the complex, often conflicted nature of their partnership. The following day, she completed the legal transfer of her children to Kathy, reinforcing her decision to distance herself from both her marriage and her parents' influence. Over time, Melissa spent less time with Christopher, dedicating more hours to work, forming her own social circle, and eventually beginning a relationship with another man, Thomas Dixon. These personal choices, combined with legal entanglements, probation issues, and custody complications, created a turbulent period in Melissa's life. The months leading up to her disappearance were marked by instability, shifting relationships, and a determination to carve out independence, setting the stage for the tragic events that would later unfold. Melissa Wolfbarger's adulthood was marked by both familial strife and repeated brushes with the law. In 1997, she faced theft charges which resulted in probation, requiring her to complete community service, attend GED classes, and report regularly to probation officers. However, she frequently failed to meet these obligations, demonstrating a pattern of non-compliance. In October 1998, Melissa was arrested for violating her probation and spent 30 days in jail. Upon release, she remained under the same conditions, yet within a month, she again failed to adhere to the requirements. Despite these legal setbacks, Melissa sought to establish independence from both her family and her former spouse, Christopher. She worked double shifts at Waffle House, maintained periods away from Christopher, and cultivated a social life beyond her marriage. By December 1998, she had been absent from Christopher's home for weeks, creating ambiguity about her intentions. Given her documented history of probation violations, Christopher might have interpreted her absence as an attempt to avoid legal consequences rather than a signal of danger. These repeated infractions, combined with her desire to maintain autonomy, positioned Melissa in a precarious situation in the months leading up to her disappearance. The intersection of legal difficulties, personal decisions, and strained relationships contributed to the confusion surrounding her fate. Her efforts to assert independence, while understandable, also complicated interpretations of her actions and whereabouts, leaving those around her uncertain of her intentions. This section underscores the instability in Melissa's life, highlighting the challenges she faced in balancing legal obligations, personal autonomy, and the complexities of her familial and marital relationships. In December 1998, Melissa Wolfbarger ceased returning home entirely. Christopher, familiar with her prior patterns of leaving for days or even weeks, assumed she had chosen to live independently, exercising the autonomy she had increasingly sought in recent months. By contrast, her mother, Norma Patton, later claimed she sensed something was wrong, either during Christmas 1998 or on her own birthday in February 1999. However, Norma provided multiple, conflicting versions of this timeline, casting doubt on her statements.
Despite her reported concerns, Norma did not file a missing persons report until January 2000, more than a year after Melissa's disappearance. During the interim, Norma and Carl Patton visited Christopher's former residence, discovering it empty and learning from neighbors that he had moved away. They also traced him to his former workplace on Avon Avenue, coincidentally near the location where Melissa's remains would later be recovered. These visits highlight a peculiar involvement in tracking Christopher while offering little clarity about Melissa's whereabouts. The delay in reporting raised critical questions about the family's awareness and motivations. If Norma and Carl truly suspected danger or foul play, their failure to involve authorities promptly left an extended gap in official oversight and investigation. The timeline of their actions, the conflicting accounts, and the protracted reporting period all contributed to a narrative fraught with ambiguity. Investigators would later scrutinize this delay as part of the broader investigation, questioning both the timing of the report and the reliability of the family's testimonies. Ultimately, Melissa's absence, coupled with delayed official notification, amplified the mystery surrounding her disappearance. setting the stage for a complex and contested legal inquiry into the circumstances of her death and the roles played by those closest to her, family conflicts and testimonies against Christopher. When the case reached trial, Melissa Wolfbarger's mother, Norma, and her sister Tina provided testimony portraying Christopher as a domestic abuser and attributing responsibility for Melissa's disappearance and death to him. However, the defense argued these accounts were heavily influenced by long-standing animosity toward Christopher. Norma admitted that from the very beginning, she had absolutely hated Christopher. Opposing the relationship when Melissa was only 16, she recounted attempts to prevent them from dating, efforts to stop their marriage, and actions aimed at coercing Melissa onto birth control. Tina, likewise, expressed strong disapproval of Christopher and actively sought to separate the couple. The defense suggested that allegations of abuse emerged only after Melissa began working alongside Tina at Waffle House, implying these claims were shaped by influence from Norma and Tina rather than objective observation. Further complicating matters, the defense highlighted that Melissa had legally abandoned her children, transferring custody to Christopher's mother, Kathy Wolfbarger, undermining assertions that she would never voluntarily leave her children. Jurors were presented with a complex web of familial hostility and conflict, raising questions about the credibility of the testimony against Christopher. Norma and Tina's motivations, rooted in long-standing opposition, could not be separated from the narrative presented to the court. The prosecution emphasized their statements to establish a pattern of control and abuse, but the defense countered that personal bias and resentment colored the accounts, rendering them less reliable. This section illustrates the intricate family dynamics central to the case, where evidence and emotion intersected, and where the line between factual reporting and subjective influence was blurred. Understanding these relationships is critical to evaluating the trial's proceedings, as jurors were asked to weigh not only the content of the testimonies, but also the personal histories, prejudices, and intentions of those providing them, creating an additional layer of complexity in assessing Christopher's alleged culpability.